Raise your hand if you've read the entire Dungeon Master's Guide. Don't lie to me, put your hand down. I polled more than 20,000 of you guys, and only 21% of you have read the whole DM's guide for whatever edition you run. That's right, if you put 10 Dungeon Masters in a room together, only 2 of them will have read the entire DMG. Also, one of them apparently brings their own sheets to hotels. Fucking weirdo. Until last week, I was like most of you. I'd skimmed the 5th edition DMG and read specific sections when I needed them, and I honestly didn't feel like I was missing much. But now I've become an arch DM, or whatever you call the people who are either bored enough or obsessive enough to read a 300-page reference book cover to cover. And lo and behold, there's some really helpful stuff in here. The problem is that helpful stuff is buried in a poorly organized, bloated mess of a book that can't figure out what it's trying to be, which means there were things in here that would have really helped me that I just didn't know to look for. Hidden gems that we're missing out on because this book front loads 26 pages about the planes of existence before it even mentions encounter design. But don't worry, I'm not gonna tell you to read the entire book. I am not your 4th grade teacher. Shout out to Mrs. Mack, I can only aspire to be that cool. I am glad I read it, and I do wish I'd read it earlier, but there were also huge chunks of it that I didn't find helpful or necessary. Instead, I'm gonna share 10 sections that I wish I'd known about before. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like encounter balancing tables or magic items. If you've read anything, that's the stuff you've read. I'm talking about the kind of stuff that isn't in the index. Those weird little sections and tables that are just snuck into the middle of some other chapter. Those parts that could really solve problems for DMs, but that you have to already know about in order to find. First up, Renown. These are optional rules nested in the section about factions and organizations. The idea is that characters have reputations with various groups, and you're giving that reputation a score. So let's say you're a rogue and you're connected to a local thieves guild. We'll call it the Crooked Key. When you complete tasks that benefit the guild, you'll gain renown with them, bringing you up through the ranks. Maybe when you first join, you're just a tumbler, but once you've gained your first 3 points of renown, you advance to the rank of deadlock. Now, when you interact with members of the Crooked Key, they have a base level of trust in you. Maybe they're willing to fence hard-to-sell items for you, since they know you're not a rat. But only once you advance to the next rank of Gatekeeper will you get perks like direct access to black market contacts, or the ability to send tumblers on missions of your own. What I love about this is that it makes being part of an organization actually fun and makes it really matter in the game. I've never prioritized being a member of a temple or a guild or anything like that in a D&D game because I never felt like that would matter much. But with this system, players have transparency into how their actions are affecting their rank. They're given secondary motivators that can complicate their decision-making processes, and they're getting material rewards for their choices. There's a similar system on the next page called Piety, which is basically the same thing but for gods. I will say though, I don't love keeping track of yet another number, so this would be something I'd probably have my players keep track of for themselves. Also, I don't think every character needs to use this in order to incorporate it into your game. You can just use it for the ones who seem interested in it. Next up, Planar Portals. I know I talk trash about the Planes chapter, but this part actually really grabbed me. It's just one page about any stationary interplanar link, what they might look like, and how they might be guarded, activated, and accessed. I think it's very easy to picture all portals as glowy Doctor Strange circles, which makes them feel a lot like a video gamey shortcut. But this section reminded me that portals can be much more narrative than that. A portal can be a doorway between worlds, but it can also be something much weirder, like a ship or a town. It may have a mystical guardian who needs to be convinced or tricked or fought in order to pass through. And there's a whole list of different ways that a portal might be opened. Everything from you must speak the command word to this portal only opens when a particular constellation is overhead. As a DM, I'm sometimes hesitant to introduce a portal for fear of my players suddenly being able to teleport or plane hop whenever they want. But this section is full of ideas for how to make the use of a portal into its own adventure, and how to ensure that just because your party knows where a portal is or has traveled through it before doesn't mean that they've unlocked permanent fast travel access. It also made me suddenly very intrigued by the idea of sending players through a portal accidentally. Under a new moon, this ordinary clearing becomes a portal to the Shadowfell, could make a night of camping into something much more exciting. Sort of like how you're about to be unknowingly sent through a portal to today's sponsor. Yes! My Son de Flor dress arrived just in time to wear to dinner tonight. This is from their new fall-winter collection. Obviously, I'm a huge nerd, so I'm gonna use it as part of a fantasy costume. But tonight, I gotta cosplay as a normal person, and it's great for that too. Dang it, this always happens to me. I mean, yeah, this certified natural linen is so timeless and sustainable that an elf ranger would undoubtedly love it, but I probably shouldn't wear this to dinner. Oh, come on, this is even worse. I definitely can't wear plate armor to a restaurant, no matter how much wearing these ethically sourced fabrics and supporting slow fashion makes me feel like a paladin championing artisans. Normal person, Ginny. Normal person. There we go. I knew this dress could suit all kinds of occasions. Now no one at dinner will know I'm a weird nerd. Whether you're going for fashion or fantasy, Sewn to Flor's new fall-winter collection isn't just stylish, it's also good for the earth and the people who live on it. Use the code 15GinnyD to take 15% off your order through September 25th. Check out the description for details. Welcome back from your interplanar journey. Let's talk about moral quandaries. Lots of DMs are interested in giving their players a tough choice, something that challenges them no matter how high level and powerful they are. The kind of decision where no matter what they do, there will be some kind of consequence, and they just have to decide which consequences they're willing to accept. This section offers up 5 types of quandaries, like the ally quandary, in which you need 2 different allies in order to accomplish your goal, but they refuse to work together. The party has to choose which ally they're willing to go without and figure out how to fill in that gap. Or the rescue quandary, in which the party can either stop the villain or save innocents, but cannot do both. If you choose to save lives, the villain gets away, but if you choose to take out the villain, innocent people die. This is exactly the kind of tool that I think should be in the Dungeon Master's Guide, a practical, actionable set of instructions for storytelling. Yes, it's possible to come up with moral quandaries on your own, but a section like this can function as training wheels for people who aren't sure how to do that yet, or as a framework to help you generate ideas if nothing particularly clever is coming to mind. Next, we're checking out special features for magic items. This section is just a set of 4 rolling tables for magic items. Who created it, what's its history, what minor property does it have, and what's its quirk. You can use any of or all of these tables to customize a magic item. So let's say you have a +1 longsword. You can roll on these tables to turn that into a +1 longsword created by fiends, made of black iron, warm to the touch. It was named in a prophecy, and some fiends actively seek this sword in hopes of fulfilling it. Any who wields it can speak and understand Infernal, but you can only access its magical properties if the sword has tasted humanoid blood in the last 24 hours. Or if you don't want to roll on all 4 tables, you can just use one for flavor. This Cloak of Elvenkind was worn by a great elven hero from history. This Dagger of Venom is made from a green dragon's tooth. I love coming up with items like this, but usually if I haven't prepared something and I'm picking something on the fly, I just fall back on a boring magic item with no real story behind it. Now that I know that these tables are here, I will never hand out a +1 longsword again. This is just such a quick, easy way to make magic items feel unique and interesting, not only so that your players feel special for having them, but so that magic items feel special in your world. Some ancient spellcrafter poured their power, their expertise, maybe years of their life into making something truly powerful, and giving the item a story and a personality demonstrates that. Okay, here's a big one: other rewards. I think we've all experienced loot and treasure feeling less exciting the further you get into a game. At first you have no money and you have no items, so finding a cache of gold or a cool object feels awesome. The longer you play and the more wealth your characters collect, the more extreme the rewards need to be in order for them to be motivating. So either loot stops being fun, or DMs feel pressure to provide more and more powerful items. This section covers rewards that are not treasure or item based: supernatural gifts, marks of prestige, and epic boons. A supernatural gift might be a blessing from a deity as a reward for restoring a desecrated temple, or a charm granted to you by a unicorn that you rescued from a coven of hags. A mark of prestige might be a parcel of land granted by a noble, or special training from a skilled expert. Epic boons are specifically for level 20 characters in case you want to keep playing past the point where you can level up. They're things like increasing your max HP or gaining true sight. I like these for the same reason I like the Renown system and special features for magic items. When you're playing the same game with the same characters for years, it can be challenging to reward your players in novel ways. Would you rather the number next to GP just go up every session? Or would you rather one adventure end with you pocketing a bunch of gold, and then the next one gains you a rank with your guild, and then the next one earns you a divine blessing, and then the one after that gets you a shield once wielded by a legendary warrior. I know which one sounds like more fun to me. Next up, resolution and consequences. When you're using the basic rules, D&D is pretty black and white. You try to do something, you roll the dice to decide if you succeed or fail. This section offers a few optional ways to introduce shades of gray into your dice rolls. There are 3 optional rules here, and most people have probably only heard of one of them: critical success or failure outside of combat. Usually a nat 20 or nat 1 on an ability check or saving throw doesn't mean anything in particular, but this variant rule gives them some weight. However, I think the other 2 optional rules in this section are way more interesting. The first is success at a cost. With this rule, when a player fails a roll by just 1 or 2, you can allow them to succeed with a complication. Like maybe they swing their sword at an enemy and they fall short of the AC by 1, so instead of a near miss, they land the attack, but doing so disarms them or knocks them prone. The second is degrees of failure. With this rule, how much you fail by determines how dire the consequences are. So failing a check to disarm a trap by 3 might just mean the trap isn't disarmed, but failing that same check by 10 means the trap is triggered. I like these options because real life isn't black and white, so degrees of failure and success can make the world feel more realistic and complex. Plus, if you're running the kind of game where players are meant to feel heroic, this builds that narrative. It allows dungeon masters to root for our players and make them feel like the protagonists without just handing them unearned rewards. Okay, this next one's just a little guy, Improvising Damage. It's just 2 short tables. One gives examples of what kinds of damage might be dealt by random things, like being burned by hot coals, falling into a vat of acid, or wading through a stream of lava. You know, just normal day-to-day experiences for an adventurer. The other one offers a quick reference for how deadly that damage is depending on character level. So you know that collapsing a tunnel on top of your 4th level characters will kill them, but collapsing a tunnel on your 15th level characters will just be an inconvenience. This is one of those things that experienced DMs can probably come up with off the cuff, but for beginners, just having a little context of what these damage numbers look like as actual injuries is super helpful, especially when you're first learning the game. 1d4 damage versus 2d12 damage versus 10d6 damage can feel really abstract. If a player pushes an enemy into a fireplace during combat, you might not know how much damage to roll. This is the kind of table I think a new DM should be able to find and check in seconds at any time. And Wizards seems to at least partially agree, since the second table from this section is printed on the back of their DM screens. But honestly, I'd like to see both of these tables there. Now we'll flip ahead just a few pages to chases. This one, like a few others on this list, is technically in the index, so it's on me for missing it up until now, but I wanted to mention it because as both a player and a DM, I've always found chases frustrating because I didn't know there were rules for them. As a player, it sucks to have somebody run away from you and to be basically just told that they're gone and you can't chase them. And as a DM, I just kind of assumed everyone would dash perpetually and whoever had the most movement speed would win. And if the target and their pursuer had the same movement speed, it would just be an exercise in futility, just 2 parties moving in parallel until one of them gave up. Turns out there's a pretty straightforward system for this. Participants can dash, but depending on their constitution score, may eventually get exhausted. Making attacks or casting spells while chasing or being chased obviously slows you down, and there are also rules for things like the target trying to hide and lose their tail, and suggestions for how to make chases into interesting scenes using complications. This could be things like obstacles, interruptions, or splitting a group of targets into smaller parties to force pursuers to split up or choose. When I read this section, I was like, oh, not only have I learned how to handle chases if they come up, but this actually puts chase scenes on the table as a type of encounter that I might intentionally introduce. This honestly makes it sound pretty exciting. Speaking of sections that are in the index but get ignored, I also want to talk about poisons. This is actually a section I was aware of already, but I constantly see people online who don't seem to know about this list. In fact, I recently read a thread on Reddit where people were arguing about poison being boring in D&D, and I had to scroll a shockingly long time to find someone who knew about these pages and mentioned them. It's just a list of 14 sample poisons, everything from contact poisons to poisons that need to be ingested or inhaled to poisons that are applied with a weapon through an injury. There are unique effects beyond just damage, like malice, which is inhaled and causes blindness and the poisoned condition, or midnight tears, which is ingested and deals no damage until the stroke of midnight. This section is shockingly complete compared to what I would expect from the DMG at this point. For example, every poison has a the price, and there's even a few paragraphs with suggestions for how characters might be able to harvest or craft their own poisons. Reading this, I had two gut impulses. First, I suddenly wanted to play a character who's a poisoner, and second, I was full of ideas for how to use these poisons as parts of adventures. Imagine the party finding out that the queen was poisoned with midnight tears, and they're being set up for it. If they can't find a culprit or neutralize the poison by midnight, they're going to be accused of assassinating the queen. Doesn't that sound like a fun session? Okay, this last one isn't going to be for everyone, but it sounded really fun to me, and I've never heard of it before. Plot points. These are a resource, points awarded to players that they can spend in order to influence the plot of the game. It allows them to temporarily step into the Dungeon Master's territory and make narrative or world-building choices of their own. There are three options for how to use these points in a game. First, you can spend a point to add some twist or new element to the game. For example, when your players are visiting a shop, one of them might spend a plot point to say that there's a secret back room with items for sale that aren't strictly legal. You then accept that new element and incorporate it into the game, deciding what items are for sale in that room and what this means about the shopkeeper who manages it. If this feels too much like players getting free wish fulfillment, you can complicate the use of plot points with the second option, the plot thickens. With this option, after a player spends a plot point, the player to their right needs to add a complication. So yes, there's a back room with secret inventory, but in order to get access to it, you need to pay a membership fee and give the shopkeeper a vial of your blood. The third option is particularly wild and sounds like it could be a lot of fun for a specific type of group and a specific type of game. It's called The Gods Must Be Crazy, and in this variant, there is no permanent DM, and you spend a plot point in order to take over as the Dungeon Master. I think that last one is going to appeal to the smallest number of tables, but the first two sound like a fun way to give a party of bold, creative players a fun way to contribute to the direction of the story, beyond their own characters' actions. It won't be right for everyone, or even for every game, but it sounds like a lot of fun to me, and I'm eager to try it out. That's not even close to all the thoughts I had going through the Dungeon Master's Guide, but honestly, 10 things is probably already too much for a single video. I would suggest you pick out 2 or 3 of these things that grabbed your attention and go look at them in more detail. You know, when I ran my Have You Read the DMG poll and read comments about the results, I saw a few people dismissively label this as a people hate reading thing, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't think that's why people don't read the DMG. This book is kind of a slog. There were so many times when I would break off in the middle of a paragraph to page ahead and see how much longer I had until the next chapter. If I weren't reading it for a video, there were several spots where I would have just given up. And I love reading. I have an English degree. I just finished reading Middlemarch for fun. Your pier glass or extensive surface of polished steel made to be below, the scratches centering toes will be minute in a fine and multitudinous concentric circles around that little sun. And I know people will say you're not meant to read it start to finish, and I only kind of agree. To me, it feels like this book can't figure out if it wants to be a step-by-step guidebook, which is read in full, or a collection of reference materials, which are accessed when needed. And since it ended up somewhere in between those two things, it can't really be effectively used as either. It's too dry and in-depth to be read as a unit, not to mention that the chapter order makes little to no sense if you're reading it front to back. But it's too poorly organized and covers too much miscellany to be used as a reference manual. Most of the 10 things I just listed are things I didn't realize were in this book, even though I'd skimmed it and read through the index countless times over the years. It feels like in order to reference the book, I need to already know everything that's in it. And in order to know what's in it, I have to read the whole thing, or at the very least, read and understand every heading on every page. When you see questions being posted in Dungeon Master communities every single day that are already answered in the DMG, and the top commenters don't seem to realize that either, then maybe the book is part of the problem. There's good information, but it's being presented in a way that most Dungeon Masters are not benefiting from. Unfortunately, despite all that, I do think that DMs should read as much of it as they can. I know, I'm sorry, I hate that I've landed there. Not all of it will be helpful, but it's tough to find the parts that will be helpful without wading through the parts that aren't. If you only read one chapter, I would suggest Chapter 3, Creating Adventures, and in second place, Chapter 8, Running the Game. As I'm sure we're all very aware, we're getting a new Dungeon Master's Guide in a couple months. Part of why I wanted to read the whole 2014 DMG, even though it's about to get updated, is that I want to make sure I'm reviewing and critiquing the new book with complete context. But regardless of what's in the new book, I learned things from the 2014 DMG that are going to improve my games. I have my quibbles about the new player's handbook, but one thing I think they got right is that it's extremely approachable. It's well organized, it's concise, it's easy to read. If the Dungeon Master's Guide gets that same treatment, I think we're gonna start to see a lot more than 2 in 10 DMs reading it. But also, they'd better fix challenge rating or I swear to God they're gonna find out why I always carry a sword.